Hello friends. First of all, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can be informed about the videos I upload, and especially to like the video. Thank you. Now, let's move on to our video. One of humanity's oldest and most profound mysteries is hidden within the story of Adam and Eve. Texts that seem unrelated at first glance, sacred scriptures, ancient myths, and the legends of long-lost civilizations all converge on a single question: how and why was the first human truly created? For centuries, this narrative has existed not merely as a religious belief, but as a powerful symbol believed to conceal the deepest secrets of existence itself. In Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, the creation of Adam and Eve begins in a divine garden, a paradise where humanity is formed from earth, animated by a divine breath, and surrounded by forbidden knowledge. But what if the true mystery lies not in the garden, but in what these shared elements actually represent? What if creation was not solely a divine miracle, but the trace of a deliberate and calculated process? The striking similarities behind the story of Adam and Eve, combined with unusual scientific and mythological parallels, suggest that this narrative may be far more than a simple creation tale. And now, it is time to examine this story once again. Are these ancient accounts nothing more than myths, or are they echoes of a forgotten cosmic reality? Throughout this journey, we will explore the creation of Adam and Eve and attempt to understand where humanity truly came from and for what purpose. But one thing already seems clear. The answers humanity has been searching for since the dawn of existence may lead us into far deeper unknowns and challenge many of the truths we have long taken for granted. The idea that humans were created from earth is often associated exclusively with Islam. This assumption, however, is a common misconception shaped largely by geography and cultural familiarity. In reality, the belief that humanity was formed from soil, clay, or mud is one of the oldest creation concepts known to human history, extending far beyond the Abrahamic religions. And behind this concept lies a remarkably deep symbolism. I have often emphasized that religious texts, regardless of their origin, are essential sources for anyone engaged in serious research. Here, once again, these texts open doors to entirely new interpretations. The Quran is generally considered to offer fewer details on creation compared to other Abrahamic scriptures. Yet, in this context, the opposite appears to be true. When verses related to human creation are arranged according to their chronological revelation and narrative structure, they reveal a striking resemblance to ancient myths and legendary traditions that date back thousands of years. For example, in Surah Sa'd, the Quran states, "I will create a human being from clay. When I have fashioned him and breathed into him from my spirit, fall down before him in prostration." This passage clearly describes the Creator shaping a being from clay before animating it with a divine essence. At this stage, it is important not to approach the story purely through a modern scientific lens. Otherwise, the mention of clay may seem absurd and cause the deeper meaning to be dismissed entirely. The true symbolism of earth, soil, and mud will become clear shortly. In subsequent verses, the Quran repeatedly emphasizes that humanity was created from clay and earth, consistently referring to the first human, Adam. The continuation of the human race, however, is described differently. The Quran explains that God began the creation of humanity from clay and then made his descendants from an insignificant fluid. This distinction is critical. The first human is described as being formed from earth, while subsequent generations continue through biological reproduction. This is precisely where mythology and science appear to intersect, because while ancient texts describe symbolic creation, they also acknowledge biological continuity. Now let us explore the deeper meaning behind the symbolism of being created from earth. As mentioned earlier, the belief that the first human was formed from soil is not exclusive to Islam. It is as old as civilization itself. In Chinese mythology, the goddess Nuwa is said to have molded the first humans from yellow river clay. In Shinto belief, the human body is formed from the soil of the first landmass, while the soul comes from the breath of the divine. In Mayan mythology, the first human race was created from mud, but this creation failed, leading to a second attempt using maize dough mixed with blood, producing a more obedient humanity. The Hopi Native Americans believed that the world and humanity were created and destroyed 4 times through catastrophic floods, with each new humanity being shaped from earth by divine beings. According to the Dogon tribe, the creator Amma formed humans from moist soil and breathed life into them. In Greek mythology, Prometheus shaped humanity from clay and gave it life. These examples could be multiplied across hundreds of belief systems, yet the common element never changes: earth, clay, or mud. This raises an important question. How could civilizations and tribes that had no contact with one another share the same creation narrative for thousands of years? From a conventional historical perspective, this should be impossible, unless, at some point in the distant past, the world was not as fragmented as we assume today. To understand what the symbolism of Earth truly represents, we must return to the earliest civilizations that recorded their knowledge in writing. The Sumerians, who emerged in Mesopotamia around 4500 BCE, are widely regarded as the first civilization to develop a complete system of writing, law, astronomy, and organized religion. What makes their sudden appearance so puzzling is not merely their advancement, but the lack of any visible transitional phase. They did not slowly evolve from primitive beginnings. Instead, they appear almost fully formed, already possessing complex knowledge. According to Sumerian tablets, humanity was not created for companionship, enlightenment, or spiritual fulfillment. Humans were created for work. The texts describe a group of divine beings known as the Anunnaki, who ruled over the earth. Beneath them existed another group, often referred to as the Igigi, tasked with heavy labor. They dug canals, cultivated land, and maintained the world the Anunnaki governed. Over time, the Igigi rebelled. Their labor had become unbearable. Faced with collapse, the Anunnaki sought a solution. The answer was the creation of a new being, one designed specifically to replace the labor force. This is where the symbolism of Earth becomes critical. The tablets describe the creation of humans using clay mixed with the essence of the gods. This is not described as magic, but as a process. There are failed attempts, beings that cannot function properly, and finally, a successful creation. This narrative mirrors the recurring theme found in later religious texts. The idea of shaping, forming, and breathing life into matter suggests design rather than spontaneous creation. In this context, Earth does not merely symbolize humility or mortality. It symbolizes raw material, the base substance used to construct a biological form. The divine breath, on the other hand, represents consciousness, intelligence, or awareness. When these two elements are combined, a functional human emerges. This interpretation aligns strikingly well with modern understanding. Human bodies are composed of elements found in the earth: carbon, iron, calcium, and minerals identical to those in soil. What distinguishes humans from lifeless matter is not the material itself, but consciousness. The Sumerian texts also emphasize that once humans were created, they multiplied rapidly. They were organized. They were taught. They were assigned roles. They built cities and temples not for themselves, but for the gods. This introduces a disturbing possibility that early humanity was not an independent civilization, but a managed one, guided, instructed, and controlled by a higher authority. The Anunnaki are repeatedly described not as abstract spirits, but as beings who eat, drink, argue, and make decisions. They require shelter. They demand offerings. They experience conflict. This portrayal strips them of absolute divinity and places them closer to advanced rulers than eternal gods. Over time, however, this distinction fades. As generations pass, memory transforms into myth. Technology becomes miracle. Authority becomes divinity. And beings once described as rulers are elevated into gods. This transition marks the birth of religion as we understand it today, not as deception, but as reinterpretation, a gradual process in which real events are reshaped to fit human understanding. This is why the creation from earth appears again and again across cultures. It is not merely symbolic language. It is a preserved memory retold through belief. When examined from this perspective, the story of Adam is no longer isolated. It becomes part of a much older narrative, one that predates modern religion by thousands of years. And this realization forces us to confront a difficult question. If humanity was created to serve, then when did we become free? If humans were created to serve, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What happened when humans began to think for themselves? This question brings us to one of the most misunderstood symbols in human history, the forbidden tree. In religious tradition, the forbidden tree is often reduced to a moral lesson about obedience and sin. But when examined carefully, this explanation feels incomplete. The punishment does not fit the crime. Eating a fruit does not justify exile, suffering, and death, unless the act itself represents something far greater. In ancient symbolism, trees are not merely plants. They represent knowledge, lineage, and transmission of information. The so-called tree of knowledge is not about food. It is about awareness. When Adam and Eve eat from the tree, they do not gain physical power. They gain perception. They become self-aware. They recognize themselves as independent beings. This moment marks a fundamental shift. According to the texts, their eyes are opened. They understand nakedness, shame, and identity. These are not biological changes. They are psychological ones. This suggests that the forbidden act was not disobedience, but awakening. From the perspective of those who created humanity, this awakening was dangerous. A self-aware worker is no longer a tool. Once humans gained awareness, control became difficult. This explains the sudden severity of the response. Expulsion from the garden is not merely punishment, it is separation. The garden represents a controlled environment, a place where humans lived under direct supervision. Once expelled, humans are forced into autonomy. They must survive, they must labor, they must reproduce without guidance. This transition marks the true beginning of human history as we know it. The story continues with another strange detail. God prevents humans from eating from the tree of life, stating that they must not become immortal. This line reveals something critical. Immortality was possible. Knowledge was restricted. Life extension was guarded. This implies that the creators themselves possessed longevity, and they feared humans acquiring the same trait. Once again, the narrative points not to abstract divinity, but to beings protecting their advantage. This theme appears repeatedly across cultures. In Mesopotamian myths, Enki warns humans against knowledge that could threaten divine authority. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is punished for giving fire, a symbol of knowledge, to humanity. In all cases, the pattern is the same. Knowledge elevates humans. Control collapses. When viewed through this lens, the story of Adam and Eve transforms. It is no longer a tale of moral failure. It becomes the story of humanity's first rebellion, not through violence, but through understanding. And this rebellion carries consequences, because awareness brings responsibility, survival without guidance brings hardship. The price of freedom is struggle. This interpretation does not diminish religion, it deepens it. It suggests that ancient texts are not simplistic rules, but layered records of humanity's transition from dependency to autonomy. The garden was not paradise because it was perfect. It was paradise because it was controlled. And humanity's exile marks the moment we stepped into uncertainty, independence, and history itself. After the expulsion from the garden, the narrative shifts from creation to consequence. This is where the story becomes more grounded, more human, and far more revealing. The account of Cain and Abel is often presented as a simple moral lesson about jealousy and violence. Yet beneath the surface, it carries deeper, symbolic meaning that aligns with the themes we have already uncovered. Cain and Abel are described as brothers, but they represent two fundamentally different ways of life. Abel is a shepherd, a nomadic caretaker of living beings. Cain is a farmer, bound to the soil, cultivating the land. Their offerings reflect this divide. Abel offers living sacrifice. Cain offers the fruits of the earth. One is accepted, the other is rejected. This rejection is often interpreted as divine preference, but the text itself never clearly explains why. This ambiguity suggests that the story is not about morality alone, but about function and role. In ancient societies, different groups served different purposes. Some worked the land, others managed resources. Some were favored, others were replaceable. When Cain kills Abel, the act is not merely murder. It is the elimination of a rival, the removal of a competing lineage. This interpretation aligns with ancient concerns about inheritance, genetic lines, and control over future generations. God's response to Cain is equally revealing. Cain is punished, but not executed. He is marked and sent away, protected from being killed by others. This mark has puzzled scholars for centuries. Why protect a murderer? Unless Cain still served a purpose. The mark ensures survival, not forgiveness. It suggests regulation rather than justice. Cain is exiled, yet allowed to build cities. He becomes the founder of civilization. The text states that Cain builds the first city and names it after his son. This detail is often overlooked, yet it implies that technological and societal development emerges not from innocence, but from conflict and separation. Human progress is born outside paradise, outside divine supervision. This pattern continues through Cain's descendants. They are credited with metallurgy, music, and craftsmanship. These are not spiritual achievements, they are technological ones. This reinforces the idea that human advancement accelerates once direct oversight ends. Once again, the narrative suggests that independence, though painful, is necessary for growth. The story of Cain and Abel is not about good versus evil, it is about divergence, two paths, two destinies, and the realization that humanity's future would be shaped not by divine protection, but by human choice. This marks another step away from control and another step toward autonomy. And with each step, humanity moves further from its creators and closer to becoming something entirely its own. One of the most unusual details in ancient creation narratives is the extraordinary lifespan attributed to early humans. In the Bible, figures such as Adam, Seth, and Methuselah are said to live for hundreds of years. This detail is often dismissed as metaphor or exaggeration. Yet when examined alongside other ancient sources, a consistent pattern begins to emerge. Sumerian king lists describe rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the Great Flood. In Mesopotamian texts, early humans and semi-divine beings possess extended lifespans far beyond modern biological limits. This raises a critical question. Were these lifespans symbolic, or do they reflect a biological reality that no longer exists? One possible explanation lies in lineage. According to several ancient traditions, early humans were not purely human. They were described as having divine ancestry. The concept of the sons of God mating with human women appears in Genesis, producing the Nephilim, beings described as mighty and renowned. This idea is not unique to the Bible. In Greek mythology, gods repeatedly mate with humans, producing demigods with extraordinary abilities. In Sumerian myths, the boundary between gods and humans is fluid, not absolute. This suggests that early humanity may have existed in a transitional state, neither fully mortal nor fully divine. Extended lifespan, in this context, becomes a marker of genetic proximity to the creators. As generations pass, this lifespan gradually decreases. By the time of later biblical figures, human life expectancy sharply declines. This shift is not sudden, it is gradual. This gradual decline mirrors the fading of divine bloodlines and the increasing separation between humans and their creators. The flood narratives may have played a critical role in this separation. By wiping out large portions of humanity, the flood effectively reset genetic continuity. Only a select lineage survived, further narrowing the connection to divine ancestry. After the flood, lifespans decreased dramatically. This pattern appears across cultures, not just in one tradition. Once again, the consistency is striking. This does not necessarily imply supernatural immortality. Rather, it suggests that early humans may have possessed biological traits that were later lost through isolation, adaptation, or deliberate intervention. The idea of long life may represent a time when humanity existed closer to its origin before environmental, genetic, or social changes altered its nature. In this light, the story of early longevity is not fantasy, it is memory. A distorted recollection of a different human condition, one that no longer exists. This realization reinforces a central theme running through all these narratives. Humanity did not begin in weakness. It began in proximity to power, to knowledge, to something greater. And as that proximity faded, so did the extraordinary traits associated with it. As the ancient narratives reach their final stage, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The gods withdraw, the divine presence fades, and humanity is left to continue alone. This separation is not described as a sudden disappearance, but as a gradual retreat. In Mesopotamian texts, the Anunnaki eventually return to the heavens. In biblical tradition, direct communication with God becomes increasingly rare. Prophets replace presence, voices replace sight. This shift marks the true beginning of human independence. With the creators gone, memory begins to change. Events once witnessed directly are retold through stories. Stories become traditions, traditions become belief, and belief becomes religion. This transformation does not occur through deception, it occurs through time. With each generation, details blur. Context is lost. What remains is meaning, not accuracy. This explains why ancient myths across cultures retain structure but lose specifics. The roles remain, the hierarchy remains, the great flood remains, the chosen survivor remains, but the original nature of the beings involved becomes abstracted. They are no longer rulers or overseers, they are gods. This process leaves humanity in a unique position. For the first time, humans must govern themselves. They must define morality without supervision. They must seek meaning without guidance. This is why early civilizations become obsessed with law, order, and divine favor. They are attempting to reconstruct a lost connection. The separation also introduces fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of judgment, fear of being alone in the universe. These fears fuel ritual, worship, and obedience. But they also fuel curiosity. As direct answers disappear, questions multiply. This marks the birth of philosophy, science, and introspection. Humanity begins to look inward rather than upward. The departure of the creators does not end the story. It begins a new one defined by uncertainty, creativity, and responsibility. The final legacy of these ancient narratives is not submission. It is freedom, a freedom that comes at a cost. Without guidance, humanity must choose its own path, and every choice shapes history. When viewed as a whole, the story of Adam and Eve is not merely a religious origin myth. It is a record of separation, the moment when humanity transitioned from being guided to being alone. Whether the creators were gods, advanced beings, or symbolic forces no longer matters. What matters is the outcome. Humanity inherited the world, and with it, the burden of choice. This is the true meaning hidden within the oldest story ever told.